The Alpha King's wolf chose his bride over him and accidentally became their love therapist. The mating decree had been sealed with his blood before Damien Blackthorne had thought to ask the obvious question: who was the woman on the other end of this arrangement, and did she understand what she was walking into? He had not asked, because it had not seemed relevant at the time. The Voss territory to the west had spent 2 years applying the kind of pressure that was more exhausting than open conflict. Trade routes quietly rerouted, water rights suddenly disputed, messenger wolves arriving a day late without explanation. None of it justified a war, but all of it justified resolution. The council had proposed the union. Damien had reviewed the terms. They were sound. He had pressed his seal into the wax and moved on to the next document on the table. That had been 6 weeks ago. Now he was standing at the stone archway of his own great hall on the morning the Voss convoy was due to arrive, and Cale, who had been manageable and quiet for the better part of 3 years, was doing something inside his chest that made no strategic sense. The wolf was vibrating. Not with the sharp, tight urgency that preceded a fight, when Cale pressed against Damien's muscles and sharpened his senses into something almost painfully precise. Not that. This was lower and slower, the rolling internal tremor of an animal that had caught a scent it had never encountered before and was straining toward it with a certainty that had no rational explanation and no intention of offering one. Damien stood at the window and looked at the tree line and told himself it was simply territorial instinct. A new wolf was coming into his pack. His body was registering it. That was all. Cale sent back a feeling that translated very clearly as, "That is not all." "The convoy has cleared the outer gate," said Garrett Flynn, arriving from the south corridor with a folded report. He was Damien's senior advisor, a composed and organized man who had managed complexity on behalf of Blackthorne Keep for 9 years, and had learned to deliver information without dramatizing it. "They'll reach the courtyard in approximately 10 minutes. Good. The Great Hall is arranged. Your council are in position. Good." Garrett hesitated for exactly 1 second, which was enough for Damien to know a third observation was coming, that he had not asked for. "You have been at that window for 23 minutes, sir." Damien turned from the window. Garrett did not flinch. In 9 years, he had learned not to. "The hall," Damien said. "Yes, sir." The corridor to the Great Hall was long and stone-walled, and carried sound with a kind of deliberate amplification that Damien had always found appropriate. This was not a place that should be moved through quietly. It had been built to hold power, and power did not apologize for its own sound. He had run these corridors as a child, had walked them numb and grief-fogged the morning after his mother's funeral, had paced them on the eve of his first major territorial conflict when he was 22, and certain he was not ready, but equally certain that he was not going to let anyone see that. He had walked every version of this corridor. Tonight he walked it, as the version of himself that had spent 12 years dismantling the idea that he needed anything he did not already have. The Great Hall was full, tables arranged along both side walls, the center fire burning clean and high in the sunken stone pit, his senior wolves ranked along the left in order of standing. The Voss delegation had already been escorted inside and positioned along the right, 12 wolves in total, still in traveling clothes, holding themselves with the slight physical precision of people who were on someone else's territory and had decided not to let it show. One of them was not holding herself precisely. One of them was simply standing. She was positioned near the center of the Voss line, not at the front. He noted that immediately. She had placed herself where she could be found without presenting herself first, which was a choice, not an accident. Her traveling coat was dark and well used. Her hair was tied back without ornament. She stood with her feet set at shoulder width and her hands folded in front of her. And from the moment Damien came through the Great Hall entrance, she was looking directly at him. Not at the room. Not at the fire or the ceiling or the senior wolves along the left wall. At him. He walked to the head of the room and took his position. And the whole way across that floor, she watched him with an expression that stopped him from categorizing her in the half-second assessment he applied to everyone. It was not admiration, and it was not fear, and it was not the careful blankness that intelligent people sometimes constructed when they were managing feelings they did not want read. It was direct and unhurried, and completely without performance. She was looking at him the way a person looked at a difficult problem they had agreed to work through, with their full, undivided, unsentimental attention. Inside Damien's chest, Cale went absolutely still. Not the stillness before a strike, not the stillness of sleep. The stillness of a wolf that has just found what it has been searching for and does not want to breathe wrong in case it disappears. Damien stood at the head of the room, composed and unreadable, and quietly decided that whatever Cale was doing, he was going to pretend it was not happening until he had time to address it privately. Lord Piran of the Voss delegation, an older, formally built man with a carrying voice, stepped forward and began the ceremonial address. The standard language of political union, peace between territories, promises honored, the future secured in the names of those who had given their word before. Damien had heard this speech or something very like it more times than he could usefully count. He listened and simultaneously did not listen, because the part of his mind that usually remained clear and tactical was currently occupied with the fact that across the room, the woman along the right wall had still not looked away. Most people looked away, not from submission, strong wolves had their own dignity, but from the instinct that said holding an alpha king's direct gaze on his own ground for too long was a choice that required a reason. Even wolves who were not afraid of Damien looked away eventually, simply because it was the sensible thing to do. She had not looked away. He understood, without being told, that this was also a choice, and not an accident. Elder Harlan Moss stepped forward to deliver the Blackthorn response, and Garrett appeared briefly at Damien's right shoulder. Her file notes that she managed the Voss pack affairs alone for 8 months after her father's death, he said quietly. She was 23. No territory was lost. No internal fracture occurred. I read the file. I wondered. You received it 6 weeks ago, and the binding was signed 4 days later. Damien did not respond to this observation, because responding would have required acknowledging that Garrett was correct, and he had been correct for 9 years running and did not need additional encouragement. The addresses concluded. The ceremony moved to the receiving portion, the direct acknowledgement between the principals. Damien walked forward. Serafina Voss walked forward. They met in the center of the room, with the fire between them and 2 walls of wolves behind them. She stopped at the exact correct formal distance. She knew the protocol precisely. He looked at her. Up close, the steadiness of her gaze was even more remarkable than it had appeared from across the room. Her eyes were dark brown and clear, and they held nothing performative. No manufactured calm. No assembled confidence. No visible effort of any kind. She was simply looking at him, fully and directly, and waiting. Alpha King Blackthorn, she said, his name and title, delivered cleanly, given equal weight as words, and not inflated into a formal display. She did not bow. She was not required to by the terms of the arrangement. She clearly knew this. Serafina Voss, he replied. A short silence opened between them. Was there something you specifically wanted to say? She said. Or is this portion of the ceremony simply us confirming we have both arrived on schedule? Along the left wall, Elder Harlan Moss produced a sound that he converted very quickly into a deliberate cough. Damien looked at her steadily. There is traditionally a formal exchange of intent at this point in the ceremony. I know the tradition, she said. Both of us have been given the scripted version. Neither of us wrote it. I was wondering whether you prefer to use it, or whether you would rather we say something true instead. Cale expanded in Damien's chest, like a slow, deep breath let out after holding it too long. Something true, Damien said. She nodded once, with the air of someone who had expected this answer, and prepared accordingly. My father gave his word to your council before he passed away. I will honor that word, because his integrity was his own, and I will not let it remain unfinished. I am a trained healer, and I will continue that work within your pack, because it is necessary, and because it is what I know how to do. I will fulfill the obligations of this arrangement that are clearly defined and fairly applied. In return, I need genuine respect, not ceremony, not performance, and the resources and space to do my work properly. If those things exist here, I will hold up my end of everything I am supposed to hold up. If they do not exist, we will have a problem. She said the last 4 words exactly the way she had said all the others, steadily, clearly, and without the need to underline them. There was no warning in it. No attempt to intimidate, just an honest statement about how things worked, offered to someone she had apparently decided deserved the honest version. The hall was very quiet. Those conditions are acceptable, Damien said. Something minute shifted in her face. Not a smile. Something that existed in the quieter territory beneath a smile. The small, specific release of a person who had been braced for resistance and found the ground easier than expected. Good, she said. He was aware, looking at her, that Cale was doing something unprecedented. The wolf was not growling, or pressing, or straining. The wolf was doing what Damien could only describe as glowing, a low, steady internal warmth that had no precedent in 12 years of coexistence. It was not the warmth of readiness, or the warmth of satisfaction after a fight resolved or a hunt completed. It was quieter than all of those things, and more deliberate. It was the warmth of something that had found its position and intended to hold it. Damien filed this under things to deal with privately, and returned his attention to the ceremony. The rest of the formal proceedings completed. He did his part, said his words, stood where the ceremony required. Serafina Voss moved through her portions with the same focused efficiency she had applied to everything else, correctly, without ornamentation, looking forward. The evening meal was quieter than the formal ceremony. She ate without scanning the room to see who was watching her. She answered questions from the council members seated near her with direct, considered responses. She left the table when the first acceptable window opened. Damien stayed and talked logistics with Garrett and Elder Moss, and gave them the answers they needed, and when they finally withdrew, he sat alone at the long table for a while, with the fire burning down in the pit, and the hall emptying around him. He thought about what she had said, not the political framing of it, that he had understood immediately. He thought about the particular quality of her directness, the way she had offered honest terms to a man who held considerably more power in the room, without softening them, and without making them a challenge. Just information. This is how I work. This is what I need. This is what you should expect from me. He went to his study and pulled the Voss file from the shelf and read it properly for the first time, all of it. She was 24 years old, healer since 15, had developed a treatment method for silver burn wounds that reduced recovery time by roughly a third, adopted now by 3 other territories, had declined the Northern Healing Guild twice, had managed the Voss Pack affairs alone for 8 months at 23, no territory lost, no fractures, no crises that the outside world had seen. When the council took over, the pack they inherited was stable. Damien set the file down. 8 months, alone at 23, grieving. Cale was warm in his chest, not urgently, not demandingly, just there, settled, patient, as though whatever this was had already been decided from the moment she walked through the door, and the wolf was content to wait for the rest of the situation to reach the same conclusion on its own time. This is not what I agreed to, Damien said aloud to the empty room. Cale sent back a feeling that was gentle and completely certain, and said simply, yes it is. Damien pressed 2 fingers against the bridge of his nose. He went to bed. He lay in the dark and listened to the keep around him, the change of the watch, the wind in the pines, the settling of old stone, and he did not sleep for a long time. Somewhere in the east wing, a door was closed on a woman who had looked at him, without looking away, and had told him the truth about what she needed, in the same breath as she told him the truth about what she would give. He lay there with that for a while. Cale burned low and steady and warm, the kind of warm that did not go out. Serafina Voss had not planned to like Blackthorn Keep. She had planned to find it functional, to identify what it offered her in practical terms, space for her work, safety for her person, the structural stability that came with a well-run pack, and to build a workable life within those limits. She had not planned for anything beyond workable. Workable was, in her experience, a significant achievement in situations a person had not chosen. She was up early on the second morning, before most of the keep had stirred. She tied her hair back, put on her practical coat, and went to walk the grounds before anyone could offer to accompany her or explain anything to her. She had learned long ago that the first observation of an unfamiliar place told you its truest character, before other people's interpretations arrived, before you started seeing what you had been told to see instead of what was actually there. What Blackthorn Keep told her on that first unguided walk was this. The walls were maintained with attention, not just repaired when they failed, which meant resources were being applied consistently to upkeep, rather than saved for crises. The supply routes through the courtyards were logical, The paths people actually walked matched the paths that would make the most functional sense, which meant someone had designed the space for use rather than appearance. The wolves she passed in the outer corridors were alert and at ease in equal measure, which was a specific combination that only existed in packs where the leadership expected performance and also trusted the people performing. A pack under excessive fear ran differently, tighter, faster, with eyes that moved more than necessary. These wolves moved normally. She formed an opinion that was different from the one she had carried into the Great Hall the previous day. She did not allow herself to become comfortable with the new opinion yet. She filed it and kept walking. The healing wing was on the south side of the second level. She found it without difficulty and knocked on the open door frame. Nora had been the keep's primary healer for 11 years, which was evident from the way the space was organized. The particular logic of someone who knew exactly where everything was and had arranged it that way on purpose. She was compact, steady-handed, and looked at Serafina with the measured expression of someone who had not yet decided what category to put her in. Serafina did not push. She asked practical questions. Current patient load, the most common injuries in the territory, which supplies came locally, and which had to be imported. Nora answered with the thoroughness of someone who took her work seriously and would give it to anyone who asked properly. By the end of the overview, the measured expression had shifted slightly. Not warmth, not yet, but an opening. "The supply records are in the second drawer," Nora said, gesturing toward the workbench, "if you wanted to review them." "I do, thank you. I won't touch anything without checking with you first." Nora nodded and returned to her work. It was the beginning of something that was not quite friendship and not quite alliance. Something more practical than the first, and more human than the second. Serafina recognized it as one of the more valuable things she had found since arriving, which she kept to herself. The list came out of her pocket that afternoon. She had written it the night before, in the spare hour before sleep, the way she always wrote lists, specifically, and without softening language, clear requests, with clear reasons. She had added 2 items after seeing the healing wing in the morning, brought the total to 7, and gone to find Garrett Flynn. He was in the East Wing administrative office, surrounded by organized document stacks. He looked up from his work without making her feel like an interruption, which she noted as a good sign. "Serafina," he said. "Garrett," she replied. She held out the list. "Some practical requests for the arrangement period. I was told you were the appropriate route." He read through it carefully. His expression shifted twice, once near the top and once near the end. "Shared access to the healing wing records," he said. "With Nora's agreement, which I've already obtained informally. Direct communication access to the Alpha King for substantive concerns. Not routine ones, only structural barriers that affect my ability to work or fulfill my obligations. I do not want to wait 6 weeks in a scheduling queue for things that need a decision this week." He looked at the list for another moment. Then he looked at her. "In 9 years of managing these arrangements," he said carefully, "these are the most specific requests I have received from an incoming member at this stage. Is that a problem?" "I am still deciding whether it is remarkable or simply refreshing." He folded the list. "Most of this I can authorize directly. The communication access item requires him." "Understood." The response came back by evening. All items approved as submitted. She read the note twice, set it with her papers, and returned to the healing wing records without allowing herself to assign too much meaning to the fact that all 7 items had been approved and none of them had been negotiated down. The third afternoon was when everything shifted in the keep's opinion of her, though she did not know it at the time. She was at the workbench reviewing the previous month's patient records when she heard movement in the corridor, not running, which would have meant panic, but the fast, loaded pace of people carrying weight with urgency. She reached the door before the thought was fully formed. 2 young wolves came around the corner with a third wolf carried between them, a teenager, 15 or 16, one hand pressed to his side. She had the injury typed before they reached her. Training wound, lateral muscle tear with possible rib involvement from the angle of impact. Deep, addressable. "Second bed on the left," she said. "Come." One of them started. "Nora is." "I am also a healer," she said. "Now." They came. She had her coat off and her hands washed before the door finished closing. She talked to the injured wolf in an even, calm voice while she worked. getting his name, Eli, establishing his pain response, ruling out the more serious possibilities. She worked quickly, and the work was clean. Nora appeared midway through, assessed the situation in one look, and handed Serafina the second tool she reached for without being asked. The injury was properly addressed in under 20 minutes. When Eli was settled and the two friends who had carried him in were sent to report to their training supervisor, Nora stood at the basin beside her and said, "You knew the sequence." 6 years of treating this type of wound, Serafina said, drying her hands. Nora was quiet for a moment. "I'll add you to the active roster, if that's acceptable." "It's preferable," Serafina said. What she did not know was that Damien had been passing the south corridor with Garrett when she stepped to the door, coat already off, voice already carrying the specific calm of someone who had handled this kind of emergency too many times for it to involve adrenaline. He had stopped walking. He had stood where he was and watched for longer than he would have chosen if the decision had been fully his. Then Cale had pressed warmth against his ribs, with a confidence that was becoming familiar and deeply unwelcome, and Damien had turned around and gone back the way he had come, without entering the corridor. That evening, Garrett mentioned it once. She handled an acute injury in the healing wing this afternoon. Eli Bran, one of the training program juniors, would have been a 2-day recovery case without prompt treatment. She had it addressed in 20 minutes. "I know," Damien said. Garrett looked at him briefly, said nothing further. The second formal signing happened on the 4th day. A smaller ceremony. The primary parties and the required witnesses. The final confirmation that made the arrangement permanently binding. Serafina signed in clear, even handwriting. Damien signed with his usual brief, decisive signature. When both had signed, and the witnesses were beginning to withdraw, he looked up. She was already looking at him. 3 seconds. The room was still moving around them. Garrett speaking to a council member. 2 witnesses exchanging words over the document. 3 seconds in which the movement of the room seemed to happen somewhere else, and there was only the direct, unhurried connection of 2 people who were both paying full attention and both very aware of the fact. Then Garrett turned back, and the 3 seconds closed. Damien went to his study after the ceremony, and stood in the middle of it for a moment without doing anything. He was not a man who stood still without purpose. Tonight, he was doing exactly that, which was itself a kind of information. Cale was settled and warm and patient. He made no suggestions. He simply remained, the way a fire remained when it had found good wood, without hurry, without uncertainty, committed to burning for a long time. "You know something," Damien said to the empty room. It was not quite a question. The wolf sent back the feeling of a small, knowing quiet. The feeling that said, "I have always known. You are simply catching up." Damien turned off the lamp and went to bed. He caught himself, just before sleep, thinking about the 3 seconds, and refused to think about them further. Cale was warm. The kind of warm that meant something, even to a man who had spent 12 years trying to need nothing. 3 weeks after the arrangement was formally sealed, Damien was in the middle of the most important territorial negotiation of the year, and his wolf decided it was the perfect moment to take control of his legs. The negotiation was with the Callaway Pact to the north, 3 days of talks that had been building toward this morning, this room, this table. Damien sat at the head of the council chamber with his senior advisors arranged on either side, and the Callaway delegation across from them. The item on the table was access rights to the Eastern River Basin, which both territories had claimed historical rights to, and which had been the underlying source of a simmering border tension that had lasted 11 years without resolution. They were 40 minutes into the final session. The argument was precisely at the inflection point where Damien's next statement would either settle it or extend it into another 3 days. He had the statement prepared. He had been building toward it through the entire session. It was the kind of strategic maneuver he executed with the particular calm of someone who had studied the terrain thoroughly and knew exactly where to place his weight. He opened his mouth to deliver it. And Cale moved. Not with the usual pressure of an opinion expressed through feeling. Not with the subtle warmth or the gentle push. Cale moved the way a wolf moved when he had decided something was happening regardless of what his human half thought about it. With the full, committed momentum of a being that had made up its mind. Damien's body stood up. He was aware of standing. He was aware that he had not chosen to stand, and that he was now standing, and that this was a problem. From some distance inside his own skull, He heard the Calloway delegation shift in their seats, and Garrett's breathing change by a very slight but detectable degree. "A brief recess," said Damien, hearing his own voice from slightly too far away. 10 minutes. He walked out of the council chamber. Cale walked them through the main corridor, through the archway to the inner courtyard, down the steps to the south wing, moving with a direction and a sureness that had nothing to do with anything Damien had consciously decided. He tried to regain control and found that Cale was not precisely refusing him. The wolf was not fighting. He was simply occupied with going somewhere, and the somewhere was more important to him than Damien's objections. The inner courtyard of the south wing was quieter than the main spaces of the keep. In the corner near the herb garden, Serafina was crouched beside a young Omega wolf, barely more than a boy, who had come to her with a wound on his forearm that was not healing the way it should have. The boy's name was Kalen. He was 11 years old. He had the enormous, serious eyes of a child who had decided that being hurt was something to be managed quietly, so as not to bother anyone. Serafina was talking to him in a low voice, the kind of voice that was made for the specific purpose of making a person feel less alone. Her healer's bag was open on the stone beside her. Cale walked Damien's body across the courtyard. Damien arrived beside her before he had processed the fact that he had crossed the space. He crouched down, his own legs, his own action, the wolf having apparently accomplished the goal of arriving here, and was now content to let Damien handle the actual interaction, which was arguably worse. "The inflammation is the problem," he heard himself say, in a voice that was softer than any voice he used in council chambers. "Not the wound itself. The tissue around it is still responding to something silver adjacent." Serafina looked up at him. For 1 second she looked at him, with the expression of a person confronted by something unexpected. Then she looked at the wound, and then back at him, and her expression shifted into the one she wore when she had received useful information, and was processing it. "Warmblood root," she said. "Do you have any in the South Wing stores?" "There should be. 3rd shelf. Healer's cabinet behind the inner door." She looked at him for another moment, reading something in his face that he was not sure he was deliberately showing, and then she stood and went to get it. Damien stayed crouched beside the boy. "Does it itch more than it hurts?" he asked. Kalen stared at him with large eyes. "Yes, sir." "That's the silver response. It'll stop once the tissue settles. It's not serious." The boy relaxed by a degree that was disproportionate to the information. Just the reassurance from an authority that it was not serious had done something meaningful. Damien observed this, and filed it, and did not examine why it made something in his chest feel complicated. Serafina came back with the warmblood root, applied it with swift and practiced hands, and wrapped the arm properly, while explaining to Kalen exactly what the medicine was doing, and what he should expect over the next 2 days. She spoke to him like a person who deserved a real explanation, not like a child who should be given a simple reassurance and sent away. The boy left, looking considerably less burdened than he had arrived. Serafina stood and picked up her bag and looked at Damien with the direct, considering expression that he was beginning to recognize as her default mode of engaging with anything she found worth thinking about. "You knew the specific treatment," she said. "I grew up near the southern herb beds. I used to follow our pack healer around as a child." He paused, which was unusual for him. He was not a person who paused. "She died when I was 11, but I remembered what she taught me." Something happened in Serafina's face. Not pity. He would have hated pity. It was something quieter, the recognition of a person who had also lost someone irreplaceable, and knew the particular texture of that specific kind of absence. She did not say she was sorry. She simply looked at him for a moment, and then said, "The warmblood root was exactly right." He held the exchange in his chest for a moment, then the full weight of where he was, and why, landed on him. He stood up. "I need to get back to the council chamber." He walked back through the south wing, at a pace that was, objectively, faster than the situation required. In the council chamber, the Calloway delegation was waiting. Garrett had managed the recess with characteristic efficiency. Damien took his seat, delivered the statement he had been building toward, and resolved the Eastern River Basin question in 11 minutes. It was the fastest resolution of an 11-year dispute in recorded pack history. That evening, in his study, Damien closed the door and sat down and said, directly and without preamble, to the wolf living inside his own bones, We need to have a conversation about what happened today. Cale responded with the feeling of complete attentiveness. The wolf was listening. You took over my legs in the middle of a negotiation. A feeling of mild, unbothered acknowledgement. You walked me across the courtyard to where she was working. The feeling grew slightly warmer. Confirmation. That is not acceptable. Damien pressed both hands flat on the desk. That is not how this works. You do not make decisions for my body without my agreement. We have always operated within an understanding. That understanding includes the fact that you advise and I decide. You do not walk me places. Cale was quiet for a moment. Then he sent back a feeling. It was not apologetic, and it was not aggressive. It was the feeling of a wolf who had done something deliberate and knew exactly why, and was offering that reason, not as a defense, but as a fact. The feeling said, as clearly as feeling could say anything, you would not have gone on your own. Damien sat with that. He could not, honestly, disagree. He would not have gone to the courtyard on his own. He would have remained in the council chamber, and the negotiation would have concluded, and he would have spent the rest of the day within his usual parameters. He would have been correct to do so. He would also not have crouched beside a boy who needed reassurance, and told him the truth, in a voice that apparently belonged to a part of him that he did not let out very often. The negotiation was important, he said. Cale sent back. She is more important. Damien looked at the ceiling for a long time. I did not agree to that conclusion, he said. The wolf was warm and certain and entirely untroubled. This, Damien said to the ceiling, is going to be a problem. Cale sent back the unhurried, settled feeling of someone who had already decided that whatever Damien chose to call it was fine, because it was already happening, and things that were already happening did not need to wait for permission to continue. Damien turned off the lamp. He sat in the dark for a while. Then he went to bed, and did not sleep for a long time. And when sleep came, Cale was warm in his chest, and the memory of his own voice, in a softer register than he usually let himself use, was still sitting somewhere in the space between his ribs, quiet and peculiar, and impossible to dismiss. Serafina Voss had grown up among wolves, who kept journals the way other people kept weapons, as a tool for managing what the world threw at you before it had a chance to accumulate into something unmanageable. Her father had kept one, his father before him. She had started her own at 14. During the first bad winter she had been old enough to understand the danger of, and she had kept it ever since. The journal she started in her 4th week at Blackthorn Keep had a different character from the ones she had kept before. Her previous journals were records, events, observations, medical notes, decisions made and the reasoning behind them, organized, clear, forward-looking. This journal began the same way. Then something changed. The first entry that was not purely factual read, Tuesday. He handed the boy the diagnosis before I had said a word. His voice was different, not softer exactly, more like the same hardness over a different shape underneath. I do not know what to do with that information, and I am documenting it here, because I am not sure where else to put it. She read it back, considered it for a moment, and then wrote below it. His eyes were gray this morning in the council meeting, and gold in the courtyard. I do not think he noticed the change. She closed the journal, and went back to the healing wing. Over the following 2 weeks, the entries accumulated. Wednesday. He stopped in the corridor outside the records room when I was inside. I could hear him through the door. He stood there for approximately 40 seconds, and then walked on. There was no reason to stop there. I have no explanation for why someone stops outside a closed door for 40 seconds. Friday. 3 new warm blood root seedlings appeared in the herb tray in the healing wing. Neither Nora nor I ordered them. They were simply there when I arrived in the morning, labeled in handwriting that I have now seen on exactly one other document, the signed copy of the arrangement. The following Monday, Kalen came back to have his arm checked. He walked past my door without knocking, which is protocol. 30 seconds later he knocked. I opened the door. He said that the Alpha King had told him to come back on Monday. He said this the way a child reported information that came from an authority he trusted without question. I asked Kalen whether the Alpha King had told him anything else. He said the warm blood root would have worked by now and I should confirm it with you. Kalen then added, he knows a lot about plants. He said his mother taught him. I thanked Kalen and he left. I sat with that for a while. Serafina closed the journal and pressed it shut with her palm. The warm blood root seedlings, the corridor stop, the way the wolf's color in Damien's eyes shifted in the south wing courtyard, the voice that came out differently when no one who needed impressing was watching. She was a healer. She had spent a decade training her observations, disciplining them, trusting them over assumption and over hope equally. And her observations were telling her something she was not entirely prepared to hear. There were two beings inside that man. She had known this intellectually. Every wolf had a human half and a wolf half, living in a shared body, under a negotiated arrangement that most people took for granted. But what she was observing was not the normal ebb and flow of wolf and human sharing space. What she was observing was a wolf who was operating on an independent agenda. She was fairly certain the human half of the arrangement had not signed off on most of it. She was also fairly certain that the wolf knew exactly what he was doing. She did not say this to anyone. She kept it in the journal and went back to work. The pack's reaction to her presence shifted gradually over those 2 weeks in a way she noticed, because she noticed everything, and Nora mentioned it once in the direct, spare way that Nora mentioned most things. "They are not treating you like a guest anymore," Nora said on a Wednesday morning, without looking up from the bandaging she was doing. "The pack wolves. They were treating you like a guest for the first week." "I know," Serafina said. "You are now someone they bring problems to." "I know that too." Nora finished the bandage and looked up. "The Alpha's wolves have not accepted an incoming arrangement member this quickly in a very long time." A pause. "Possibly ever. Harlan Moss told me this morning. He finds it notable." Serafina set down the plant sample she was cataloging. "What does Moss think is causing it?" Nora considered. "He thinks the Alpha's wolf is signaling." Serafina said nothing. "Wolves take cues from their alpha," Nora continued carefully. "If an Alpha's wolf has decided something, the pack can feel it. They may not be able to name it, but they feel it, and they respond." Serafina picked the plant sample back up. "That is an interesting observation." "It is," Nora agreed, and returned to her work. Serafina wrote it in the journal that evening. "Nora says the pack is responding to Kale's signal. If that is true, then Kale decided something before Damien did, which means the wolf is not following. The wolf is leading. The question is whether Damien knows this, and whether he is going to do anything about it, and whether it is any of my business." She added, "Below that, one more line. The wildflower is still on my windowsill. It has been there for 9 days. Pine-scented, native to the eastern ridge. Not something anyone brings into the keep. Not something I left there." She closed the journal. Outside, the autumn evening was moving toward full dark, and somewhere in the deeper part of the keep, a wolf was being patient in the way that old, certain things were patient. Without urgency, without anxiety, simply by existing in the full confidence that what was meant to happen was already on its way. She looked at the wildflower for a long time before she blew out the candle and went to sleep. The next morning, there was a second one. Garrett Flynn had worked for Damien Blackthorne for 9 years, which was long enough to develop a very particular skill, the ability to notice things without appearing to notice them, and to file those things away without mentioning them, until the moment mentioning them might actually accomplish something. He had been practicing this skill at a high level since the end of the 4th week of the arrangement period. He noticed, for example, that the Alpha King's route through the keep had shifted. Previously, Damien had moved through the keep along the most efficient routes, the main corridors, the direct paths, the passages that got him from one point to the next with minimum expenditure of time. Now he took routes that were not always the most efficient, routes that happened to pass the south wing, routes that happened to bring him through the outer courtyard at hours when the healing wing windows were lit. He noticed that Damien had begun requesting the daily pack welfare reports that had previously been delivered to the council only. He had not given a reason. He had simply asked to receive them. He noticed that 3 times in 2 weeks, Damien had known things about the healing wing's current cases that Garrett had not briefed him on. He noticed all of this and said nothing, because saying something would have required Damien to either confirm or deny it, and denial was the more likely response, and denial would have ended a thing that appeared to be developing in a direction that Garrett, who had watched Damien Blackthorne be completely alone in this keep for 12 years, found genuinely worth protecting. So he watched, and was quiet, and waited. He was not the only one watching. Elder Harlan Moss had made his notable observation to Nora. Two of the training supervisors had mentioned independently that the Alpha seemed more present during the pack morning briefings than usual, more likely to ask a follow-up question, more likely to linger at the end of the session. Owen Blackwell, the most senior of Damien's 3 battle commanders, had come to Garrett's office on a Thursday afternoon and said, very directly, "Something has changed. Damien is not operating differently in crisis scenarios. He is operating differently in the spaces between crisis scenarios. What is happening?" Garrett had told Owen that it was an adjustment period following the formalization of the arrangement. Owen had looked at him with the expression of a man who had known Garrett for 9 years and could identify when Garrett was being technically accurate and also not forthcoming. "Right," Owen said, and left. On a Friday in the 5th week, Garrett witnessed something he added to his private mental file under the category of events that confirm a working theory. He was in the outer corridor of the West Wing when he came around a corner and found himself 20 feet from a small, completely unplanned moment. Damien walking in one direction, Serafina walking in the other, the two of them reaching the junction of the corridor at the same time. Both of them stopped. Both of them stepped slightly to one side to allow the other to pass. Both of them chose the same side, which left them facing each other at a distance of about 4 feet, both holding their respective adjustments. For a second, neither of them moved. Then Serafina looked at Damien and said, "After you." And Damien said, "The south corridor is faster for your direction." And she said, "I know the layout, but thank you." And then they both adjusted to the correct sides and passed each other in a way that was perfectly ordinary and also somehow the least ordinary thing Garrett had watched happen in this keep in a long time. He pressed himself against the wall and waited for both of them to clear the corridor before continuing on his way. He was a professional. He said nothing. He added it to the file. The thing that finally broke Damien's composure about the whole situation happened not dramatically, but quietly, on a Tuesday evening, in the form of a single unusual sound. Damien was in the library, a room he used for late evening reading, when the documents of the day were done, and he wanted to think without having to perform thinking. He was reading a territorial history, and not absorbing much of it when the door opened. Serafina came in with a small stack of reference texts she had clearly borrowed from the north shelf some time ago, and was now returning. She had not known he was in the room. He could tell from the way she stopped just inside the door when she registered his presence, a brief hesitation, before her expression settled into its usual straightforward composure. "The north shelf," she said. "I'll be 30 seconds. "Go ahead," he said. She went to the north shelf and returned the books with efficient, quiet precision, checking the spines against the existing order on the shelf, before placing each one. She moved without the self-consciousness of someone performing absence. She simply went about the task as though the room were her own, which was a quality he had noticed her apply everywhere she went. She was almost at the door when he said, without deciding to say it, "Did the warm blood root work for Kaylin's arm?" She paused. She turned and looked at him. "Fully resolved by the second day," she said. "He came back for the check on Monday as you suggested." "Good." A short pause. "The seedlings in the herb tray," she said. "Were those from the eastern ridge bed?" He held her gaze. "The south bed. The eastern ridge variety grows taller and produces more in open air. The south bed is hardier indoors." She looked at him for a moment. "That's useful to know," she said. "Thank you." Then she left, and the library was quiet again, and Damien sat with his book open on his knee and did not read a single word for the next 10 minutes. Kale was very warm. He had been warm since the door opened and she had come in with her books and her composure and her complete lack of interest in making the moment anything other than what it simply was. "I did not plan to say that to her," Damien told the wolf quietly. Kale said, through the channel of feeling, "I know. That is why it worked." Damien closed the book. He sat in the library for a while after that, in the quiet and the warmth, with the slightly disorienting knowledge that for the first time in longer than he could honestly calculate, he had said something true to another person that he had not prepared in advance. That was new. He was not sure if new was comfortable. Kale suggested, gently but clearly, that comfort was not the same thing as good, and that Damien had been confusing the two for quite some time. Damien set the book on the table and went to bed. He slept, which was becoming more possible lately. He did not examine why. The border skirmish started the way all the worst ones started, quietly, in the dark, at the edge of a territory line that had been drawn by people who were no longer alive, to defend their reasoning for where they had drawn it. Garrett brought the initial report to Damien at 5:30 in the morning, and the report contained 3 pieces of information. A patrol had been ambushed at the southern edge near Coppergate Ridge, 2 wolves were injured, and the signatures in the tracks suggested it was a Hale party, Cormac Hale's territory to the southeast, which had been testing Blackthorn's patience for the better part of a year through small, deniable provocations. Damien read the report once. Then he stood up from his desk and walked to the war room and spent 40 minutes with Owen and 2 of the senior commanders planning a response that was swift enough to be taken seriously and measured enough not to give Cormac Hale the escalation he was probably hoping for. By 7 in the morning, a party of 14 wolves was ready at the east gate. Damien was in his traveling gear. Garrett found him at the gate. 6 days, perhaps 7, depending on what we find at the ridge. Clear my calendar from tomorrow through next Friday. Anything that requires my decision goes to Owen for preliminary assessment. Anything that requires an actual decision waits. Garrett wrote this down. The arrangement member. She has everything she needs to continue her work. She doesn't need me for anything practical. Damien swung up onto his horse. She'll be fine. Garrett looked at him steadily and said nothing further. What? Damien said. Nothing, sir. Safe travel. Damien led the party out. He did not look back at the keep as they cleared the outer gate. He had never looked back at the keep when he left it. Looking back at things was how you started to be held by them. Cale was quiet during the first day of travel. Not sulking, not protesting, just present and alert in the way that a wolf settled into when the situation required it. By the time they reached Coppergate Ridge on the morning of the second day and found the full picture of what had happened, they were both in full operational mode, and other things were appropriately secondary. The skirmish had been more significant than the initial report indicated. The ambush point had been carefully chosen, a narrow section of the territory line where the patrol route was predictable and the tree coverage was thick. Whoever had planned it knew Blackthorn patrol patterns, which was a different kind of problem from a random border provocation. This was scouted. This was intelligence-based. Damien spent 3 days tracking the party responsible, another day in what became a full confrontation in the open ground between the ridge and the Hale territory marker, and 2 more days managing the aftermath, securing the injured, reporting back through the appropriate channels, confirming the response was logged in a way that would hold up to formal scrutiny if Cormac Hale decided to escalate through political means rather than another physical provocation. He sustained a wound on the 4th day, a silver-tipped blade that made contact with his left side during the confrontation in the open ground. It was a graze. It did not slow him down, and he did not report it to the party's field healer immediately, which was a decision he made because it was not debilitating and because the field healer had 2 more serious cases to manage. By the 6th night, riding back toward Blackthorn Keep in the dark, with a wound that had not healed the way it should have, he reconsidered that decision. Silver contact did something specific to wolf tissue. It did not prevent healing entirely, but it slowed the process in the affected area in a way that was not dangerous if treated promptly, and considerably more complicated if left unaddressed. He had known this and had chosen to wait, which was a calculation that had made sense on day 4 and was making considerably less sense on day 6. He rode through the dark and did not say anything to Owen about it, and Owen, who had been watching his movement patterns for 6 days and could read injury the way most people read weather, said nothing either. They had an old agreement about this kind of thing. Owen would notice. Damien would not discuss it. Owen would keep a close eye. This arrangement had worked acceptably for 11 years. They reached the keep gates at midnight on the 7th day. The keep was quiet in the way it was quiet at that hour, not empty, not still, but settled into its nighttime rhythms. The gate watch admitted them without fanfare. The party dispersed to their quarters. Owen gave Damien a look that communicated very clearly that someone should look at that left side, and Damien gave Owen a look that acknowledged the communication and did not commit to acting on it, and Owen went to his own quarters. Damien went toward the Alpha's wing. He had made it to the inner corridor when the pain in his side, which had been manageable during the ride because riding required forward focus, became considerably less manageable in the stillness of a quiet corridor with nothing left to focus on. He stopped walking. He stood in the corridor and breathed for a moment and took an honest inventory of the situation. The wound was deeper than he had been telling himself. The silver contact had left the tissue around it inflamed and unresponsive. His body had been compensating for 6 days. In the stillness and the quiet of the corridor, the compensation was no longer interested in cooperating. The pack healer's chamber was at the end of the west corridor. He would go there. He would have it addressed properly, and go to sleep. Simple. He started walking again, and made it 4 steps, before light spilled through an open door to his left, the healing wing's secondary room, which Serafina had taken to using as an evening workspace, in the hours when Nora's cases were quiet, and she could review records and correspondence undisturbed. He heard paper being set down. Then her voice, coming through the open door, even and unhurried as always. "You're limping on the left." He stopped. A short pause. "Come inside. The light is better." He went inside. She already had her bag open on the table beside the lamp when he came through the door. She was in her working clothes, the practical dark ones, and there was a cup of cooling tea on the corner of the desk that suggested she had been here for some time. She looked at him with the direct, assessing gaze she applied to all injured wolves, and gestured toward the chair beside the table. He sat. She worked without asking him to explain himself, which he appreciated. She identified the wound, understood immediately what she was dealing with, and worked with the focused, clean efficiency that he had seen her apply every single time she was presented with a problem that required her full competence. She did not comment on the fact that it had not been treated promptly. She simply treated it. Halfway through the stitching, she said, quietly, and without looking up from her work, "Your patrol wolves were frightened when you came through the gate." He looked at the wall. They weren't showing it. "They were not showing it to each other," she said. "They were showing it in the way they moved, like people who have been holding something carefully for 6 days and are now allowing themselves to set it down." She paused. "The 2 who carried your gear from the horse." Their hands were shaking. He said nothing. "You are not someone who comes back like this," she said, tying off the final stitch with a clean, precise movement. "Not often enough for them to have built a response to it." He was quiet for a moment. "No," he said, "I'm not usually in a position where the silver contact isn't addressed within a day." "Why wasn't it?" He looked at his own hands, resting on his knees. The field healer had 2 cases that were more serious. "And you made that call yourself?" "Yes." She set her instruments down and wrapped the wound with the specific, efficient care of someone who had done this 1,000 times, and still did it with complete attention. "Your patrol wolves," she said, "do not have the information that it was a field triage decision. They have the information that their alpha came home wounded in a way that was not treated on the road. That is what their hands were responding to." He looked at her. She was not looking at him. She was finishing the wrap, her attention on the work. Her voice was level and plain, the way it always was when she said something true. "They don't usually say it," he said, "when they're afraid." "I know," she said. "Strong wolves don't. But it's there regardless." She completed the wrap and looked up at him. Being seen doesn't always require being told. He looked at her for a long moment. She looked back at him with the direct, steady gaze that had stopped him from categorizing her on the very first day she walked through his doors, and something in his chest, not Kale, something that was more specifically and uncomfortably his own, pulled tight and then loosened, the way a thing felt when it had been braced for a long time and was being given permission to release. He said, very quietly, "No, I suppose it doesn't." She held his gaze for a moment longer. Then she stood and began to pack her bag. "The wound will be significantly better by morning. Don't put weight on the left side until you've slept. All right. And eat something before you sleep. You've been riding for 6 days." He almost said that he was fine, which was the response he gave to that kind of instruction from anyone. He caught it before it arrived at his lips. "Yes," he said instead. She looked mildly surprised by this. Just slightly. The way a person looked when they expected a certain word and were given a different one. He went to the corridor, and she brought him to the door, and he walked back through the keep toward his wing. And the whole way there, Kale was absolutely, completely still inside his chest. Not the restless stillness of something waiting. the stillness of something that had just witnessed something it had been hoping for, and was holding it with the full, quiet reverence of a creature that understood the weight of what it had just seen. He ate something. He lay on his back in the dark, the wound in his side pulled with a clean, predictable ache. He stared at the ceiling for a while. Being seen does not always require being told. He thought about that for a long time. He thought about the specific quality of it, the way she had said it without softness and without clinical distance, just as a plain observation, delivered to someone she had apparently decided was capable of receiving it. He had not felt received in a very long time. He was aware, lying in the dark with Cale still and reverent in his chest, that this was a significant fact about his own life, and that it had taken someone he had met 30 days ago to make it impossible to ignore. He closed his eyes. He did not sleep right away. But when he did sleep, he slept well, and in the morning the wound had already begun to close, and Cale was warm. 2 days after Damien returned from the southern ridge, Cale decided to escalate. There was no other word for what happened over the following 10 days. The small, targeted interventions that had characterized the wolf's earlier behavior gave way to something more purposeful and significantly harder to attribute to coincidence. It began with Damien's hands. He was in the outer corridor near the records room when he heard the sound of a book landing on stone, the particular sharp sound of a heavy volume dropped from a height. He turned the corner. Serafina was crouching to retrieve a large reference atlas that had slipped from the top of a stack she was carrying to the library. His hands reached down and retrieved it before she had straightened up. He had not decided to do this. His hands had simply done it, with Cale's guidance channeled through the fine motor connection that the wolf sometimes used for exactly this kind of quiet, specific maneuvering. She stood. He was holding the atlas. She looked at it, and then at him. "Thank you," she said. "It's heavy," he said. "I know," she said, and took it from him, and continued to the library. He stood in the corridor for a moment. Then he went to his council meeting. During the meeting, he noted that his left hand was functioning with complete normalcy, which meant Cale had stopped the maneuver the moment the immediate purpose had been served, which meant the wolf had been precise about it, which meant it had been entirely deliberate. "We need to talk about boundaries," Damien said that evening to the empty study. Cale was unruffled. The next intervention came 3 days later, when a kitchen staff member dropped a basket of winter supplies at the far end of the main corridor, and Damien found himself already moving toward them before the sound finished echoing. He helped the woman, her name was Bess, she had been with the keep for 7 years, gather the scattered supplies back into the basket. She stared at him when he handed the basket back. "Thank you, sir," she said, in a voice that suggested this was not something she had expected to happen in her lifetime. "Of course," Damien said, and walked on. He told Cale that evening, "If you are going to use my body to perform acts of basic decency, could you at least limit it to situations where it has tactical value?" Cale sent back a feeling that was warm, unbothered, and very slightly amused. The council meeting was the moment everything changed. It had been scheduled for the 3rd Thursday of the month, the regular session for reviewing PAC law amendments and territorial agreements in progress. The primary item on the agenda was a dispute between 2 families over land rights in the Northern Farming District, which had been moving through the formal resolution process for several months, and had reached the point where a decision was needed. Serafina attended council sessions as a non-voting observer. This was standard for arrangement members in the first year, and she had taken the role seriously, present, attentive, positioned at the side of the room where observers sat, never offering input unless directly invited. She had been invited once, in the 2nd week, for a question about healing resources, and had answered it directly, and returned to her observer's position, without attempting to extend the moment. Damien had noted, at the time, that she had the self-discipline to engage fully, when asked, and withdraw fully when not, which was a quality that most people with something to contribute found difficult. The land dispute had been presented, and 2 council members had offered arguments for opposing resolutions when Cale moved. Not Damien's hands this time, Damien's voice. From approximately 3 feet inside his own head, Damien heard himself say, clearly and without preamble, into a pause in the argument, Serafina's perspective on this would be worth hearing. The council chamber went very quiet. Damien returned fully to the front of his own consciousness and registered what had just happened. Elder Harlan Moss was looking at him. Garrett was looking at him. The two council members who had been arguing were looking at him. Owen, seated at the end of the table, was looking at him, with the specific expression of a man who had been waiting for something to happen, and was now watching it happen. Everyone looked toward the observers section. Serafina was looking at Damien, just for a second, then she looked at the council table. The land dispute has 2 precedent cases from the Northern Territory records that neither argument has referenced, she said. She spoke in the even, clear voice she used when she was delivering information she was certain of. The first is the Callaway Fen settlement from 11 years ago, which established the principle that agricultural land boundaries held for more than 2 generations carry a weight of use claim that supersedes the original title documentation. The second is the Moss family correction from 4 years ago, which clarified that use claim must be active and consistent, not historical. Combined, those 2 precedents suggest a resolution that allocates primary use rights to the current agricultural holder, while preserving title documentation rights for the original claimant's descendants. The chamber was quiet. Then Elder Moss said, in a tone that managed to be simultaneously impressed and composed, "That is the Callaway precedent. I haven't seen that cited in 8 years. It was in the Northern Records room," she said. "I was reviewing historical land case documentation for a healing territory allocation question last week. I came across it." Garrett leaned forward slightly. That would resolve the dispute within the existing legal framework. No new amendment required. "Yes," she said, "I believe so." The discussion that followed took 11 minutes. It resolved a case that had been in process for 4 months. When the session concluded and the council was dispersing, Damien stayed in his seat until the chamber had emptied, then walked to his study and closed the door. "You said something through my voice," he said to Cale. The wolf sent back the calm, certain feeling of confirmation. In a council meeting, in front of the full council. Confirmation. "Do you understand what you are doing? Not just to me, to her. You are putting her in positions without her consent to be placed in them." A pause. The feeling that came back was more careful than the usual ones. It was the feeling of a wolf who had heard a valid point and was thinking about it genuinely. Then it sent back, "She handled it." That is not the point. She handled it well. Cale. The wolf was quiet for a moment, then it sent a feeling that was different from the others. Not confident, not warm in the usual steady way, but something more serious and more fundamental. The feeling of a wolf speaking from a place that was not about tactics or moments or small engineered incidents. From somewhere deeper. The feeling said, "I know what she is. You do not yet, but you will. And until you do, I will do what I can." Damien sat with that for a long time. He had no answer for it. He tried to find one and could not. That evening, he walked through the main corridor in the direction of the healing wing, and found Serafina coming out of it with her bag over one shoulder and a stack of papers under her arm. They walked in the same direction for about 30 steps before he said, "You were right about the Callaway precedent." She glanced at him. "I know." Moss had not seen it applied in 8 years. Neither had I. "It was the most applicable precedent," she said. It seemed worth mentioning. He held the pace for another moment. Then, it was worth more than mentioning. It resolved a 4-month dispute in 11 minutes. She looked at the papers under her arm. Then she looked back at the corridor ahead. "Then perhaps I should attend more council sessions." "Yes," he said. "You should." She did not respond immediately. But when she turned to take the east corridor toward her quarters, she looked at him over her shoulder, and the expression on her face was not the flat, assessing directness he had come to expect. It was something less guarded than that, smaller and more specific. He did not know exactly what to call it. Cale did. Cale knew very well what to call it. Damien decided not to ask. The letter from Cormac Hale's territory arrived on a gray morning in the 6th week, carried by a formally dressed messenger, who presented it to Garrett, with the particular air of someone who had been told the contents were important, and had prepared himself for a significant response. Garrett read it in the doorway, kept his expression neutral, and went directly to Damien. He handed the letter over without preamble. Damien read it once, then he set it on the desk and was quiet for approximately 30 seconds, which in Damien terms was the equivalent of someone else taking a long, steadying walk. The letter was from Cormac Hale's senior legal advisor. It cited an older territorial pact between the Hale pack and the Voss family, predating the current arrangement by 7 years, in which the Voss family had allegedly agreed to prioritize any future mating union with the Hale territory if the political situation required it. The letter did not claim this pact voided the current arrangement outright. It was more careful than that. It claimed the pact had not been formally dissolved, and that its existence constituted an unresolved prior obligation that should be reviewed by the relevant council before the current arrangement was treated as permanent. It was, in short, a legal challenge, carefully worded, designed to create uncertainty without constituting an overt accusation. The kind of document that a person with experience in territorial law had written with the specific intention of making it difficult to dismiss quickly. "Who prepared this?" Damien asked. "The language is Corvin Hale's," Garrett said. "Cormac's younger brother. He trained in territorial law in the Eastern Academies for 6 years. When was the alleged pact made?" 7 years ago, during the period when the Voss territory was under pressure from a Western encroachment. Cormac Hale provided military support during that period. It's plausible that some form of agreement was made in exchange. Who would know? Serafina, Garrett said carefully. If anyone would have documentation from her father's administration during that period, it would be her. Damien looked at the letter. His face was composed. It was always composed. But Garrett, who had 9 years of reading the specific landscape of Damien's composure, could identify the exact quality of controlled reaction underneath it. "Get me the original pact documentation from the Eastern Archives," Damien said. "Anything from that 7-year period involving Voss-Hale interaction. And set up a time for me to speak with Serafina this afternoon." "Yes, sir." Garrett took the letter. "One more thing." Damien looked at him. "The messenger is still waiting for a response. Tell him," Damien said, "that the Alpha King of Blackthorn has received the letter and will respond through the appropriate formal channels within the standard response window. Tell him nothing else." "Yes, sir." The conversation with Serafina happened that afternoon in Damien's study, the first time she had been in the room, which he registered without knowing exactly why he registered it. She sat in the chair across the desk, read the letter he handed to her, and was quiet for long enough that he knew she was thinking carefully about what she was about to say, rather than reacting to it. "The pact existed," she said finally. "I found documentation of it in my father's administrative papers when I was managing the territory after he died." "What were the terms?" "A loose priority agreement. If the Voss territory needed to formalize an external alliance through mating union, the Hale territory would be given the first consideration, subject to both parties agreeing to the terms at the time." She set the letter on the desk. It was not binding. It used the word consideration twice, and the word obligation 0 times. My father's papers also contain a follow-up note from 2 years later, written by his senior advisor, that states the pact was considered satisfied when Cormac Hale declined to pursue it in practice during the Western encroachment resolution. Damien looked at her. "You have that documentation." "I have a copy in my records from the estate papers. I kept copies of everything from that period." Of course she had kept copies. He would have been surprised if she hadn't. "We'll need to present it formally." "I know." She looked at the letter again. "Cormac Hale is not claiming the pact is binding. He's using it as leverage. He wants to create enough legal uncertainty that the current arrangement can be questioned." She looked up. "The question is, what he hopes to gain. Disrupting the arrangement? Or something else?" "Blackthorn's southeastern border access," Damien said. "If the arrangement is voided and a new one is negotiated, with Hale involvement, he gets preferential treatment on the river access question that his territory has been pushing for the past 3 years. That's a significant gain for a letter he could have sent 6 weeks ago when this was less established." Damien looked at her. "Why now?" she said. It was not a rhetorical question. She was thinking out loud in the way she did when she trusted the other person in the room to be thinking alongside her. "He waited to see if the arrangement would hold," Damien said. "If we had been having visible difficulties, he might have waited longer, or come at it differently. The fact that we are not having visible difficulties made him move sooner." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "He thinks it's becoming harder to disrupt." "Yes." She looked at the window. "He's right," she said, matter-of-factly, as though this were simply an accurate observation about the situation, and had nothing personal in it. Damien watched her face. It was composed, but there was something running beneath the composure that he was learning to read, a current under the surface, specific and real. She was not unaffected by this. She was managing it. There was a difference. "Your documentation will settle the legal question," he said. "The pact was not binding and was treated as discharged. That is on record." "I know." She looked back at him. "But Cormac Hale will not stop at the legal question. He will find something else. Then we'll address what he finds next." She looked at him for a moment. The composure was holding, but the current under it was more visible now. Not fear, not anger, but the particular fatigue of someone who had been redirecting challenges for a long time, and was tired of the machinery of it, even while being fully capable of running it. He said, before he had time to evaluate whether he should, "He will not get what he's after, not from this." She looked at him. "The arrangement is established," he said. "The legal documentation is clear, and I do not renegotiate settled agreements under pressure from people who come at them sideways." He held her gaze. "That applies here." She was quiet for a moment. The current under her composure shifted, not resolved, not dismissed, but something had been set down that she had been carrying. "All right," she said. It was a simple enough exchange. He had simply told her the truth about how things stood, but when she left the study, and he was alone again, Cale was warm, in a way that was different from the usual warmth, deeper, and less restless, the warmth of something that had found its footing. He picked up the letter from the desk and looked at it. Whatever Cormac Hale was planning, he would need to be better prepared than this. The Eastern Ridge walk happened 2 days later, and it happened because Damien had been unable to sleep and had gone outside before dawn, and had taken the eastern path along the ridge without thinking about it, and had found Serafina already there. She had not expected him either. He could tell from the brief, controlled adjustment of her expression, before it settled back to its usual composure. She was standing near the ridge's edge where the pines thinned enough to see the valley below, watching the pre-dawn dark begin to shift. He stopped when he reached her. They stood there for a moment, both looking at the valley. Then Damien felt something that was different from the usual Cale interventions. Not a push, not a movement of his hands or a shaping of his voice, something quieter, a gentle, deliberate shift in the quality of awareness inside his chest, the way a person might place a hand on someone's shoulder to say simply, "Now." He heard himself say, in a voice that was not quite Damien's typical register, softer at the edges, without the decision-maker's precision, "He wants me to tell you something." She turned and looked at him. Her eyes found his face in the low gray light, reading it. "Cale?" she said. The gold moved into his eyes slowly, the way it did when the wolf came forward gently instead of urgently. He felt the dual consciousness, his own awareness, and Cale's overlapping, the wolf at the surface but not displacing him, both of them present at once. "Yes," the voice said, and it was both of them in it now. "He knows that the way he spoke to you yesterday was wrong. He shut you out of the Eastern Corridor planning meeting without explanation. He knows that was wrong, and he doesn't know how to say it, so I'm saying it." She was very still. "He is working on it," the voice said. "He has been working on it for longer than he will admit. He does not easily say things that cost him something, but I want you to know that he knows." She looked at his face, at the gold in his eyes, for a long moment. Then she said, carefully, with the deliberateness of someone choosing each word, "Tell him that an apology I receive through someone else is not the same as an apology I receive from him, even if you are both in the same body, even if the words are true." The gold in his eyes held for another second. Then it shifted. The gray came back, full gray. Damien, fully at the front of himself, aware of the cold morning air, and the valley below, and the fact that he had just been told something true that required a response from him personally. He was quiet for a moment. She was watching him, waiting. He said, in his own voice, not the soft Cale forward voice, but his own, which was harder and more careful, and cost him something real to use this way. "I should not have excluded you from the planning meeting without explanation. You had relevant information, and I knew that, and I did not invite your input, because it was more efficient to proceed without adding complexity to the session." He stopped, breathed once. "That was not the real reason. The real reason was that I did not know how to include you in something I had always done alone, and rather than figure out how to do that, I defaulted to not doing it. That was wrong. I apologize. The valley below them was beginning to lighten. The pine trees at the ridge edge were resolving from dark shapes into distinct forms. She looked at him for a long moment. Thank you, she said. That is an apology. Yes, he said. I know. From deep inside his chest, Cale howled, not with the full force of a wolf calling across open ground, but with the internal, private howl of something that has wanted something for a long time and just witnessed the first real brick removed from the wall. Damien pressed a hand briefly against his sternum. She watched him do it. He's pleased, she said. It was not quite a question. He's insufferable, Damien said. She looked at the valley below them, and the thing that was not quite a smile appeared in the corner of her mouth. They stood on the ridge until the light changed fully around them, which was longer than either of them had planned to stand there. Neither of them left first. Cormac Hale arrived at Blackthorn Keep in person on a Wednesday morning, which was not something he had announced in advance. He came with a party of 8, formally dressed, with the particular bearing of a man who expected that arriving unannounced was an acceptable exercise of his own authority. He was broad and self-assured, and had the look of someone who had been powerful in a relatively small context for long enough to have forgotten that there were larger contexts. Garrett brought the information to Damien in the council chamber, before Cormac had reached the inner gate. Damien did not adjust his schedule. He finished what he was doing, walked to the formal reception hall at a pace that communicated absolutely nothing about urgency or reaction, and took his position at the head of the room. He let Cormac and his party wait in the outer courtyard for exactly as long as protocol permitted. Not longer. That would have been an overt signal. Exactly as long. Calmly and deliberately long enough to make a single clear point. This is my territory, and things here operate on my schedule. Cormac Hale entered the reception hall with the specific expression of a man who had noticed he was made to wait, and had decided to pretend he had not minded. Alpha King Blackthorn, he said. He was good at the formal register. He had a commanding voice, and he used it with the confidence of someone who believed a commanding voice was usually enough. Hale, Damien said. No title extended. A small thing. Precise. Cormac took a seat at the visitors' table without being offered one, which was another precise thing going in the other direction. Damien noted it, said nothing about it. I wanted to follow up on the legal question in person, Cormac said. These things move more efficiently in direct conversation. They move according to the formal process, Damien said, which is what the formal process is for. Cormac smiled. It was the smile of someone who had decided to treat the response as polite jousting rather than a definitive boundary. Of course, I simply thought, given the nature of the connection between our territories. There is no established connection between our territories, Damien said. There is a pending legal question raised in a letter, which is currently being addressed through the appropriate channels. That is the extent of the existing situation. Cormac's smile adjusted slightly. The Voss Pact has been thoroughly documented, a voice said from the doorway. Every person in the room looked toward the door. Serafina Voss was standing in the entrance of the reception hall with a leather document folder under her arm, and the steady, unhurried posture she applied to everything. She looked at Cormac Hale with the expression she used when she was dealing with something she found unnecessary, but had decided to handle properly. Damien had not asked her to come. She had not said she was coming. She had simply arrived, with the documentation, and put herself in the room. He felt something in his chest that he did not immediately categorize. A sharp, quiet thing, warmer than warmth, not yet named. Cale named it for him, quietly, certainly, without asking for acknowledgement. The original pact documentation, Serafina said, coming fully into the room and setting the folder on the table near Damien's side, includes 2 clauses that have been consistently overlooked in this conversation. The first is that the priority consideration was expressly conditional on both parties agreeing at the time of the actual arrangement, not at the time of the pact's signing. The second is that the follow-up correspondence from my father's administration explicitly describes the pact as satisfied and discharged following the withdrawal of the Western encroachment without Hale military involvement. She looked at Cormac Hale directly. The encroachment resolved without your territory's involvement. The condition that generated the pact no longer existed. My father's administration noted this in writing. Cormac Hale looked at her, and then at the folder, and then at Damien. Damien looked back at him with the expression he used for negotiations he had already won. The conversation that followed lasted 45 minutes. Cormac Hale's legal framing was thorough. His brother had been well trained, but the documentation was clear, and the precedents Serafina had cited 2 days earlier at the council meeting were already on record. By the end of the 45 minutes, Cormac Hale had not conceded explicitly, but he had pivoted 3 times to different framings of the same argument, which was the behavior of a man running out of ground to stand on. When the meeting concluded and Cormac's party had been shown out through the formal route, which gave them a very good view of the full extent of Blackthorn Keep's defenses in passing, Garrett came to Damien's side. "He'll try something else," Garrett said. "I know," Damien said. "Let him." He looked toward the door where Serafina had gone. She had left directly after the meeting concluded. Efficient. No performance. Back to her work. He went to find her 20 minutes later. She was in the healing wing with Nora, reviewing a case together, and she looked up when he appeared in the doorway, with the exact same direct composure she brought to every moment. "Thank you," he said, "for coming." "You had the legal ground," she said. "I had the documentation. It made sense to bring it." "You didn't have to." She looked at him for a moment. "You said the arrangement was established, and you wouldn't renegotiate it under sideways pressure. I took you at your word." She returned her attention to the case file. It seemed fair to back it up. He stood in the doorway for a second longer than was necessary. Nora very carefully did not look at either of them. He went back to his work. That night was the winter solstice celebration, a pack-wide tradition that had been in the Blackthorn calendar for 3 generations. Fires in the main courtyard, food from the communal kitchen, the informal gathering of the entire pack in the way that only happened on the solstice, without hierarchy or position, everyone simply present. Damien had never particularly enjoyed it. He showed up because the Alpha was expected to be present, and because his absence would have been noted, and would have undermined something about the evening's purpose. But he had always felt slightly outside the center of it, the authority in the room, which meant the gravity that everything organized around, which meant something other than a participant. This year was different in ways he noticed, without immediately being able to explain. He moved through the courtyard and the conversations flowed differently around him. People spoke more easily, extended exchanges rather than performing them, laughed without checking to see if the laughter was appropriate. He found himself in longer conversations than he had planned to be in. He found himself listening and responding in a register that felt more like talking and less like managing. He found Serafina near the outer edge of the courtyard, standing where the firelight gave way to the cool dark of the night, looking out toward the pine tree line where the forest began. She was alone, which was not unusual for her. She moved between people easily, but she did not feel the need to always be in the center of them. He walked to where she was and stood beside her. She did not look at him immediately. She looked at the fires in the courtyard, the pack gathered around them, the figures moving through the orange light. "Your people celebrate well," she said. "They do. The young ones especially. The 2 from the training group, Finn and the tall one with the red coat, Leland. They've been at the center of every fire for 2 hours. They're both 17, he said. 17 has energy I am no longer capable of accessing." She made a sound that was, remarkably, close to a laugh. Not the full sound, not the one he had heard twice before, that water over stone sound that he had been thinking about without wanting to, but close, the precursor. He held that quietly. "Cale," he said, after a moment. She turned slightly toward him. "He has been moving things in my direction for weeks," Damien said. "I want you to know I am aware of that, and that I am aware that it has affected things between us, aware that some of what I have found myself doing has not been entirely my decision." She was looking at him now. He kept his gaze on the fires. "I'm not angry with him," she said carefully. "I didn't think you were. Are you?" He was quiet for a moment. "I was. For the first week. I told him he was overstepping. He listened and did it anyway, and I stayed angry for a while and then I stopped." "Why?" He looked at the fires. "Because the places he took me to were the right places, even when I did not want to be there, even when I would not have gone on my own." A pause. "He knows things that I am slow to know, about what matters, about what I need." He stopped. "I don't say that kind of thing easily." "I know," she said. He finally looked at her. She was already looking at him, with an expression that he had not seen from her before. Not the direct assessment, not the composed professionalism, not the controlled management of a situation. Something more open, something that had decided, apparently, to exist without armor for a moment. "I did not come here expecting anything," she said. "I came here because I was going to honor my father's word, and do my job, and manage the situation that existed. I did not expect." She stopped, looked at the fires, looked back at him. "I did not expect it to feel like this." "Like what?" he said, very quietly. "Like something I might have chosen," she said, "if I had been given the choice." The courtyard fires crackled. The pack moved and laughed around them. The night was cold and clear above the pine trees. Damien looked at her for a long time. "I don't know how to do this," he said. "I should tell you that clearly. I have spent a great deal of time not letting things in, not allowing room for this kind of thing. It is not that I was broken. It is that I decided a long time ago that this kind of thing was a complexity I could not afford, and I built accordingly." "I know," she said again. "I can see the architecture of it." He looked at her. "It's a very sturdy building," she said. "But there are places where the mortar is wearing thin." He looked at the fires for a moment, then back at her. "I don't know what to do with what I feel when you are in the room," he said. "That is the most honest version of where I am." She was quiet. Then, "Neither do I, for what it's worth." Below them in the courtyard, from somewhere near the eastern fire, a wolf howled, long, rich, completely confident. Damien's jaw tightened with something that wanted to be a smile, and almost was. "Kale?" She looked toward the sound. "He's been waiting for that all evening." "He's been waiting for it for considerably longer than that," Damien said. She looked back at him, and the thing that was not quite a smile, the specific, small warmth that was more significant than a smile ever was fully present in her face now, unguarded and unhurried. "What does a person do," she said, "when they have a wolf who is a better judge of what they need than they are themselves?" "Apparently," he said, "you let him run." And the howl rose again from the courtyard below, warm and sure, and celebrating something that had taken a long time to arrive, and was not about to be quietly about it. The bond formed on a Thursday morning during something as ordinary as two people being in the same corridor at the same time. Serafina was carrying a small stack of documents from the records room to the healing wing. Damien was coming from the direction of the war room. They met at the junction of the south corridor and the east passage, and both adjusted their direction naturally. The easy adjustment of people who had been sharing space long enough to know how the other moved. And in the process of that adjustment, the back of her hand crossed the back of his. Not a clasp, not a held contact, the brief, incidental brush of two people moving through the same space. The bond snapped into place like a rope catching weight. Serafina stopped walking. Damien stopped walking. The documents she was carrying were still in her arms. They were standing 2 feet apart in the corridor junction, with the morning light coming through the east window, at an angle that was doing nothing dramatic or significant, just the ordinary light of a Thursday morning in a stone corridor. But something had changed in the space between one breath and the next, in a way that was impossible to ignore, and impossible to explain, and also, somehow, not surprising at all. The way that things felt not surprising, when they were the fulfillment of something that had been building long enough to be recognized. The mating bond. Not a ceremony, not a ritual, not a thing that was performed. A thing that simply was, when it was ready, when the conditions were met, when the two halves of a pair had been close enough, for long enough, for the bond to decide it had waited as long as it was going to wait. She looked at her own hand, the back of it, where his hand had crossed. He looked at his. When they looked at each other, neither of them spoke for a full minute. The corridor was quiet. Somewhere far inside the keep, a door closed. The morning continued existing around them, in its ordinary Thursday way, entirely indifferent to the fact that something had just rearranged itself permanently. "I didn't plan for that to happen now," she said. "Neither did I." "It's irrevocable," she said. It was not a question, she knew this. She was saying it aloud as part of the process of absorbing it. "Yes," he said. She looked at her hand again, then at the documents under her arm, then at him. There was something happening behind her composure that was more than the composure could fully contain. Not panic, not regret, but the specific, full-body weight of a life-changing, irrevocably in a moment that was too ordinary for the size of what it meant. "Are you all right?" he asked, which was not a question he had planned to ask, which meant it had come from him rather than from any calculation. She looked at him, and the composure held, and under it the weight was real and present and enormous. "I think so," she said. "I think I need a few minutes." "Yes," he said. She adjusted the documents under her arm. Then she said, quietly, "Damien." He looked at her. I am not unhappy about it," she said. "I want to be clear about that. I am not unhappy." He held what she had said. From inside his chest, Cale was not howling or surging or vibrating. He was simply there, warm and complete and entirely, finally, at rest. The wolf had been waiting for this specific moment since the first morning she walked through the doors, and now that it had arrived, there was nothing left to push toward. Nothing more to engineer. No more gentle maneuvering toward right places and right moments. The thing had happened. Everything that followed would happen between two people. "Neither am I," Damien said. She looked at him for one more moment. Then she adjusted her grip on the documents and walked on toward the healing wing, and he walked on toward the war room, and the corridor junction was empty again. He stood in the war room for a few minutes without doing anything. The maps on the table looked the way they always looked. The morning outside the high window was the same Thursday morning it had been 10 minutes ago. Something was completely different, and also everything was the same, which was the particular quality of the kinds of changes that mattered most. He was still standing there when Garrett arrived with the morning reports, looked at him once with the expression of a man who had been watching for 9 years and knew exactly what he was seeing, and then set the reports on the table and said, in his usual tone, "The Eastern Canal report is the one that needs your attention first." "Yes," Damien said. "Everything else can wait an hour." "Yes." Garrett nodded and left. Damien stood at the war table and put his hands on the edge of it and looked at the maps. The bond was there, warm and settled, like a new note that had joined a song he had been singing so long he had stopped hearing the melody. He could feel the edge of her awareness now, faint and clear, the way a window let in weather without being in it. He thought about her standing in the reception hall with the document folder under her arm, and the composed certainty of someone who had decided to back up his word with action. He thought about the eastern ridge and the gray light, and a voice that had finally said, "I apologize. I was wrong." He thought about her saying, "I did not expect it to feel like something I might have chosen." He picked up the Eastern Canal report. He was going to do his work and let the rest of it be what it was, enormous and ordinary and irrevocable. And when he saw her at the end of the day, he was going to be exactly himself, and she was going to be exactly herself, and the bond between them was going to be there, without either of them having to manage it. That was going to be enough. That was, in fact, more than enough. Cale was warm and settled and entirely quiet. He had not been this quiet, this completely still, since the morning before she walked through the doors, and the quality of the stillness was entirely different now. Before, it had been the stillness of a creature waiting for something to arrive. Now it was the stillness of a creature that had what it was waiting for, and did not need to wait anymore. Damien worked through the morning. He did not notice until midday that he was working with a quality of focus he had not felt in a long time. Not the sharp, pressured focus of urgency, but the deeper, cleaner focus of someone who has something secure to return to. He noticed it. He did not say anything about it. He went back to work. The thing that Elder Corvus had been building for 11 weeks came apart on a Friday morning, and it came apart because he had not accounted for Garrett Flynn's habit of reading every document that passed through the administrative office, including documents that were addressed to other people and routed through his office as a formality. Garrett brought the intercepted correspondence to Damien at 7 in the morning. He had been awake since 5. The correspondence was between Elder Corvus, one of the 4 senior elders on the Blackthorn Council, a man who had been a fixture of pack governance for 20 years, and a legal representative of the Hale territory. The content of the correspondence detailed a coordinated strategy. Corvus would raise a formal procedural challenge to the mating bond on the grounds that it had formed before certain internal pack protocols had been completed. The challenge itself was weak. The protocols he cited were ceremonial, not substantive, but it was designed to work in coordination with the Hale legal challenge, to create a compound situation in which two simultaneous formal challenges required the arrangement to be suspended pending review. Suspension pending review was the mechanism. In the period of suspension, a rival claim from the Hale territory could be formally registered, which would create a three-party dispute that could take months to resolve, and during those months, the pressure on all parties to accept a negotiated resolution would be significant. It was a well-constructed plan. It had required patience and careful coordination. It had required someone inside Blackthorn's council to be willing to work against the Alpha King's explicit interests, in exchange for something Corvus had presumably been promised by Cormac Hale. What it had not accounted for was Garrett. Or Seraphina. Damien read the correspondence twice. Then he stood up and went to find her. He found her in the healing wing with Nora, both of them standing over a case file, and he said, "I need 10 minutes." Nora looked between them and found somewhere else to be. He showed her the correspondence. She read it carefully. Then she set it on the table. "He's been building this for almost 3 months," she said, "since before the formal sealing." Before the formal sealing, Damien confirmed. He contacted the Hale Territory's legal representative in the second week. She was quiet for a moment. The procedural challenge is weak. Completely weak. But combined with the Hale challenge, it creates the compound situation. What does Corvus want from Cormac Hale in exchange? My best guess is Eastern land allocation. Corvus's family has a historical land claim in the Eastern District that the Council has rejected twice. Hale territory abuts the Eastern District from the other side. Between them, they could create pressure for a boundary revision. She looked at the correspondence. He would undermine his Alpha's arrangement for a land claim. He would undermine his Alpha for considerably less than that, Damien said. He's been waiting for a vulnerability for years. He tried to create one during the Callaway negotiation 3 years ago. He found a different angle here. She looked at him. What do you want to do? The question was not what should be done, or what the protocol was. It was, what do you want to do? He looked at her. Call a full council session for this afternoon. Present the correspondence. Let it be public, not just the council, the full senior pack. She nodded once. And the Hale challenge? The legal documentation you provided effectively settles the prior pact question. If the Hale challenge was coordinated with Corvus, then the Hale challenge's strength was always dependent on the internal procedural question, giving it a compound weight. Without the internal challenge, it stands on its own, and on its own, it has no foundation. So we address Corvus first. Yes. She was quiet for a moment, then, I'll be at the council session. I know, he said. Not as an observer this time. He looked at her. If Corvus is going to challenge the arrangement should be in the room, she said simply. The full senior pack council convened at 3 in the afternoon. 22 wolves in the main council chamber. Elders, battle commanders, senior pack members of standing, plus the arrangement member who stood at Damien's right, which was not the observer's side of the room. Elder Corvus sat at his usual position at the council table, and showed no sign of knowing why the session had been called. He was a composed man in his late 50s who had always found the particular power of appearing measured and moderate while operating from a position of calculated self-interest. He looked at the room with the expression of a man expecting routine business. Garrett placed the correspondence in the center of the council table. Corvus's expression did not change immediately. Damien watched it, and could see the precise moment the man calculated how to respond, and the precise moment he realized that the calculation was not going to produce a viable option. This correspondence, Damien said, to the room, not to Corvus specifically, was found in the administrative routing files 2 days ago. It outlines a coordinated strategy between a member of this council and a representative of a rival territory to create a compound legal challenge against a decision made by this Alpha, not questioned through the appropriate internal channels, not raised at the table, conducted in private, in secret, with an external party, in exchange for personal benefit. The room was quiet. Elder Corvus, Damien said, is this correspondence authentic? Corvus held his composure for another 3 seconds. Then, with the specific look of a man who has decided that the situation cannot be argued out of, but might be argued into something less severe, the correspondence reflects a conversation about legal options. There is nothing improper about exploring. The correspondence uses your personal seal, Garrett said, from his position along the wall. On every page. Silence. "I would like to know," said Owen Blackwell from the end of the table, in the direct, unadorned voice of a man who had been a battle commander for 11 years, and had no patience for the theater of this, "whether there are any other council members who have been party to external communications about the arrangement. Now, before this goes further." No one spoke. "Good," Owen said. The council session that followed lasted 2 hours. Corvus did not find a viable argument. The documentation was clear. The coordination with an external party was an unambiguous breach of council oath, the oath that every council member signed, which included explicit language about conducting PAC external negotiations without Alpha authorization. The breach was not subtle. It was on record with his seal. When the session concluded, the council had reached its recommendation unanimously, which had not happened on a difficult question in 3 years. The recommendation was formal expulsion from the council and revocation of council membership status. Damien accepted the recommendation. Corvus left the council chamber under escort and did not say anything further that was worth recording. Garrett came to stand beside Damien as the chamber emptied. "Cormac Hale," Garrett said, "will receive formal notice that the Hale challenge lacks foundation and that the previous pact has been documented as satisfied." "Yes, send it through the official channel. Formal register." The Eastern land allocation question, that Corvus was presumably working toward, goes back to the regular review process. The council's 2 previous rejections stand. "Yes, sir," Garrett made a note. Then, the council voted unanimously. "I noticed. That includes Elder Moss, who voted against you on the Callaway revision, the water rights question, and the Eastern Bridge funding." "I noticed that also." "He looked at Serafina when he cast the vote," Garrett said, in the careful, particular tone he used when he was offering information that was not quite a report. "He didn't look at you." Damien looked at the empty council table. "She was at your right," Garrett said, "not the observer's position. Your right." "I know where she stood." The pack noticed. Garrett. "Yes, sir. Go deal with the Hale correspondence." "Yes, sir." He went to find her. She was in the outer corridor, not the healing wing, standing near the window that looked toward the courtyard, in the late afternoon light that was going orange and long with the time of year. She turned when she heard him. "Corvus is gone from the council," he said. "I know. I was in the room. The Hale challenge will be formally closed." She nodded. He stood across from her in the corridor light and looked at her, and found that he had arrived here with no particular agenda beyond this, simply being in the same space, in the aftermath of a thing they had faced together, and not needing to perform any version of either of them for the other's benefit. "You stood at my right," he said. "Yes." "You knew what that would mean to the council." "Yes," she said. "I knew." He looked at her. "Why?" She looked at him with the direct, steady gaze that had stopped him from categorizing her on the very first day. "Because you said you don't renegotiate settled arrangements under pressure," she said, "and I decided the same was true of me." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, in the voice that was not the council chamber voice, or the Alpha's voice, or any of the managed versions of himself, but simply the voice of someone saying a true thing to someone he trusted with it. "I have been alone in this keep for a long time." She looked at him. "I stopped noticing it," he said, "or I convinced myself I had stopped noticing it, which may not be the same thing. And then you arrived, and I noticed." She held his gaze for a moment that was long and quiet, and not uncomfortable. "I know," she said, for the 3rd time since they had known each other, and each time the 2 words had carried something different, and this time they carried something that was close to everything. The corridor light went warm around them. Cale was at peace inside Damien's chest, not with the peace of a creature that had gotten what it wanted after engineering it into existence, but with the deeper peace of something that had always known, and had simply waited for the rest of the situation to be ready. The formal coronation of Serafina Voss as Luna Queen of the Blackthorn Territories took place on a clear morning in the 2nd month of winter. It was held in the main courtyard, with the full pack assembled and the senior council in position, and the winter light coming down sharp and pale on the stone of the keep. It was, by every account of everyone who attended, the quietest formal coronation in Blackthorn history. Damien stood at the front of the assembled pack, and looked at the woman beside him, and said the words that the ceremony required. And then he said the words that the ceremony did not require, but that he had decided needed to be said in front of his people, because they were true, and the truth belonged to the whole pack, and not just to a private space. "She is not here because I chose her," he said, in the voice that carried without being raised. "She is here because she chose to stay, because she brought her work, and her honesty, and her particular refusal to let this place be anything less than what it should be. And she did that from the first morning, before she had any reason to expect that it would be returned. She is here because she held up her father's word with more grace than it was easy to hold it with, and in doing so she gave me something I did not know I was missing." He paused. "And apparently, my wolf had better judgment than I did, but I am catching up." The packed courtyard held a beat of silence. Then a sound moved through it that was not applause and not a ceremony response, but simply what a pack sounded like when it had been told something true by someone it trusted. Serafina, standing at his right, looked at him sideways. Her expression was the composed one, the steady one, but underneath it, the current was fully present and not hidden at all, and the thing that was not quite a smile was there at the corner of her mouth, quiet and entirely genuine. He looked back at her. For 3 seconds, nothing particular happened, and also something very particular happened. Then the ceremony continued. In the months that followed, the keep changed in ways that were quiet and real. The healing wing was expanded, 2 additional rooms, better supply access, the research space Serafina had requested in her original list, given proper resources. Nora hired a second attending healer. Serafina's schedule appeared regularly on the council agenda. Damien attended council differently, less driven by the urgency of being the gravity that held everything in place, more interested in the questions in between decisions. He asked more follow-up questions. He slowed his own conclusions down. He was told by Owen, in a private conversation that Owen then denied having, that the pack's morale indicators had shifted over the past 2 months in a direction that Owen found notable. They argued, regularly, about resource allocation and council priorities, and the way certain things had always been done, and whether always was a sufficient reason to keep doing them. She would say something direct and specific, and he would counter it, and she would counter his counter, without softening it, and they would usually arrive somewhere neither of them had started. They also sat in the library in the evenings, sometimes, in the quiet that was not empty but full, the specific quality of quiet that existed when 2 people were both doing something, and were both comfortable with the presence of the other while doing it. No performance required, no management of the space, just 2 people being in the same room because the room was better with both of them in it. Cale rested, not the restless, watchful, agenda-carrying presence he had been for weeks. Engineering moments, moving hands, borrowing voices, placing wildflowers on windowsills, and warm-blood root seedlings in herb trays. He simply rested, warm and whole, in the chest of a man who had finally, after a long time, stopped needing to keep the door of himself shut. Garrett updated the administrative records. He did it in the spare, precise language that he applied to all official documentation. But in the margin of his personal note, the notebook he had kept for 9 years of observations, he would never submit as formal reports. He wrote 1 line. It said, "The Alpha is different in the silences now." He closed the notebook. He did not mention it to anyone. And in the healing wing, on the desk in the corner that had been Serafina's since the first week, the journal that had begun as clinical observation and become something else over time, was opened one final time. She looked at the earlier entries, the Tuesday notation about the voice in a softer register, the observation about the color of his eyes in the courtyard, the record of the second wildflower on the windowsill, and she turned to the last blank page. She wrote a single line. "The king is catching up." She set the pen down. Outside the window, the winter afternoon was going bright and cold and clear. Somewhere in the inner courtyard, 2 wolves from the training group were running a sprint route that Finn had apparently designed with the specific goal of exhausting everyone but himself. Somewhere in the keep's east wing, Garrett was composing formal correspondence in the carefully efficient way he composed everything. Somewhere in the war room, Owen was planning a thing that would probably require someone to do something uncomfortable. And somewhere in the council chamber, reviewing a territorial proposal that Serafina had suggested 2 days ago, and Garrett had documented, and Owen had assessed, and which was, on consideration, better than anything the regular process had produced in months. Damien Blackthorne sat at the head of his table in the ordinary light of an ordinary afternoon. He was not alone. He had not been alone for a while now. He was, with some private difficulty and a great deal of genuine relief, getting used to it. Cale was warm in his chest, not strategizing, not engineering, not pushing toward anything or steering away from anything, simply present, the way a wolf rested when the territory was safe and the pack was whole and the long, patient work of finding what was needed had finally, completely, been done. The kind of warm that did not go out. The kind that lasted.